Hey, it's a good group this morning at noon. So we praise God for that. I know you're coming from all over places from all over the state. My name is Bruce Case, and along with Domini Henry, we're privileged to be asked by our Bishop Swanson, to co-chair a End Racism for Good. Now, End Racism for Good is a movement of United Methodists and others in our state who are learning, who are celebrating, and who are acting until every heart in every community um, and every church is freed from the sin of racism. So that's what you're about. You're part of this movement by just being on this call. That means you're officially a part of the movement, in that you are giving your valuable time to listen and to learn and actually to celebrate. We're actually hitting the trifecta. We're going to celebrate, learn, and act today. This amazing foundation that we're going to learn more about. For about 30 to 35 minutes, we are going to hear from our featured guest, and I'm about to make an introduction, but just wanted to give you the lay of the land. For about 30 minutes, we will hear from the foundation, the Dr. Juanita Sims Doty Foundation. And so we've got two amazing leaders from that group going to share with us what's going on with them and what their focus is on. You're going to have a chance through the chat room and in other venues to ask questions of them. And then Reverend Domini Henry is going to lead us on the back part of the meeting, and with a couple of other things as well. So it's a pretty simple meeting today, but I believe you're going to be so glad that you took your hour break. It may go a little bit over an hour, but what we're going to do is to try to keep it to about an hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes. Should you have to leave during this, know that I'm recording this, and all you have to do is email me and say, Bruce, send me the recording, and I will send you the recording so that you can see it in its entirety, and so you can share it with other people. Just know too that most of you have probably gone through a racial healing circle, but if you have not, all you have to do is contact your district superintendent. They will get you in touch with someone who's doing that. It's a powerful experience. You'll make new friends across your district, and you're going to learn something new about yourself and about other people. And that's another way that we can chip away at racism, both within and without. Okay, let's open with a word of prayer, and I'll make my introductions, and we'll get started. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, we thank you, God, for the privilege of gathering through the technology of Zoom. Lord, all we have to do is turn on the TV, open the newspaper, look at social media, and we know that there is a lot that is broken in this world that you so love. Lord, we know that racism is a challenge. It's a problem, and it's been going on for century after century after century. And we know that you're calling us to a better way, a different way, another way, the way of love. And so, God, we pray that this hour, as we break during this time, that you would give us courage, convict us, and help us to learn something, that we might not just go from here and forget what we learned, but that we might take something with us and be a little braver, speak out a little bit more, and to be a part of the solution rather than to be part of the problem. Help us, oh God, as we together end racism for good. In your holy and precious name we pray. Amen. It is my joy to introduce to you two amazing people. Now, I have the bio of Dr. Carla L. McCullough, but Juanita, I'm hoping that somehow, I wish I had your bio too, because you're an awesome person as well. But maybe Carla or Juanita, you can introduce, say a few things about yourself. I do know that you're active at Anderson United Methodist Church, and I know I just want to thank you for starting this foundation. But let me introduce to you Dr. Carla L. McCullough. She was in Jackson. She earned her bachelor's degree from Tuskegee University in psychology and her master's in public administration from Auburn University. After having a son and feeling the tug of home, she returned to Mississippi, where she received her PhD in urban higher education from Jackson State University. Dr. McCullough serves as executive director of the Juanita Sims Doty Foundation, where she's the executor of its goals and objectives and provides direction and leadership applicable to the realization of the organization's philosophy. The mission of this organization is to improve the quality of life for children of color and the overall health and wellness of the family through youth development, mentorship, education, and advocacy. She spent the last 10 years working to build the capacity of individuals, the community, and now systems to establish more equitable opportunities for people of color, particularly the youth. Carla serves as the project director of the Ambassadors of the Evers Academy for African American Males, the A-Team. We'll learn more in a little bit about that. A mentoring program for young males of color in partnership with the Medgar and Merle Evers Institute. She is co-developer of the A-Team initiative carried out by a consortium of 21 community organizations who serve as mentor villages for the character, education, and leadership development mentoring program. She is the developer of the culturally responsive curriculum that is used across the country and has trained 200 plus mentors and volunteers from the community and public and private institutions across the nation. Dr. McCullough also serves as co-project director of the intergenerational mentoring program, Empowering Scholars Through Education, Engagement and Membership Program, ESTEAM for Girls, a project partnership with the Cleveland Empowerment Foundation, Jackson State University, and Mississippi State University. Carla develops and designs culturally responsive programming for various organizations across the state. She utilizes her training, writing, speaking, and community building so that children of color have the equitable opportunity to grow and thrive in a safe, supportive, and just society. She's one of 20 Forward Promise Fellows backed by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation from around the country that works to ensure boys and young men of color can heal, grow, and thrive. She continues to mobilize communities to bring awareness, create solutions, and increase individuals' capacity to affirm the humanity for children of color. When Carla is not carrying forward the all aforementioned work in all of her other spare time, she serves as the owner and principal consultant of the Tri-K Group, a small business consultant firm, and attends Word of Life Church. She's most proud of being the mother to an amazing son, Matthew. And so without further ado, Dr. Carla McCullough.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Bruce. I am thrilled. I had to take a second look to see if you were talking about me. But I am thrilled to be here. And I do want to give Dr. Juanita Sims Doty, the namesake of the foundation, an opportunity to speak for a moment before I get started. So Dr. Doty.
I just want to say hello to everyone, and Pastor Bruce and Pastor Henry. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And that's all I want to say, that God is amazing. He has put all of this together. We didn't know where this was going, but we know that He is in control. So Dr. McCullough, I'm sure she's going to share with you what we've been doing over the last 10 years with the foundation. I love all of you, and let's get going with ending racism. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Doty. So we want to go ahead and get started. We're always excited to be in a room of people who are interested in ending racism. And so we'll talk a little bit about the lens that we use in our ending racism work, which is dehumanization. And I'm going to share my screen with you. So our foundation was founded in 2010, and we aim to end racism by disrupting dehumanization and healing racialized trauma. Our work is based on the framework of Dr. Rhonda Sawyer Bryant and Dr. Howard Stevenson, where they created the dehumanization cycle. So before we get started, we like to lay some assumptions out there. One, that everyone on this Zoom is open to learning about dehumanization. Now, as I'm talking about this, please in the chat box, say yes, you agree with these assumptions, because that lets us know we're in the right place. Two, every person's feelings are valid, even if they're not based in facts. And that's important because we all have our own reality based on past experiences, present experiences. They don't necessarily have to be based in facts. It's just valid because they're feelings and expressions that we have. Also, there's some rubbish ideas about people, but not people who are rubbish. And finally, we all want to learn more about ending racism. So if we believe these assumptions, we will have a transformative conversation. We're going to cover definitions, dimensions of the dehumanization cycle, impact of dehumanization and racialized trauma. We're going to talk about some direct service and systems solutions, and then we'll have a question and answer section. I first want to talk about my why. Matthew, who Pastor Bruce was talking about, is to your left. I think it's your left. And so Matthew is my son in this picture. He's probably 7 years old right now. He's 11 years old. And we've had to have some tough conversations over the last year. But this is my why. And then we have over 1,100 other whys. With our mentoring program, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, this is a group of our ambassadors of the Evers Academy for African American Males. We have partnered with the Medgar and Merle Evers Institute to provide mentors for boys and young men of color in middle schools throughout the state. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the 21 organizations that serve as the mentors to these youth. And what we do is prepare them with the tools we know that they already have, but we empower them to use them to navigate a world that's not necessarily created for them. And then at the top of the screen, you'll see a few of our esteemed girls empowering scholars through education, engagement, and mentorship. About 2 years ago, we were asked, if you're doing this for boys, that means you have a foundation, can you do it for girls? And we did not necessarily have the capacity, but we partnered with Jackson State University's athletic department, as well as Mississippi State University Department. And we created an intergenerational approach to mentoring young girls of color. These are our whys. So as we talk about our lens through dehumanization, this is the reason that we do it. Our overall goal is that children of color thrive. So our objectives would be to create an awareness around dehumanization and racialized trauma. We'll provide a better understanding of the effects that they have, and we'll provide strategies to prevent trauma and secondary trauma. And we'll also look to create an anti-racist society. The problem is that children of color have to navigate a world where they're presumed dangerous and are guilty, where their innocence, potential, and humanity are routinely questioned simply because of who they are. So our definitions, we like to talk about them from beginning to end. So as we continue through this presentation, we all have an understanding. I'm basing it on Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Racial inequity is when two or more racial groups are not standing on approximately equal footing. An example, we're going to use right here in Mississippi, the public school systems. The Center for Public Integrity has reported that school districts with 75% or more Black students, none of them are rated A or B school districts. They're C, D, and F. Also, the school districts that are 75% or more white, none of them are rated D or F schools. They're A, B, or C. That's not equal footing for our students in the public school system. So the racist policy that produces or sustains racial inequity between the racial groups. So sticking with my example of inequity, it is a policy that produces this unequal footing within the school districts. An example would be the disciplinary policies. A Black student is 3 times more likely to be suspended than a white student. And that sustains or produces the inequity of the public school systems, because if they are suspended, then they don't get enough time in the schools, their scores go down, and it continues to perpetuate the inequity in the public school system. The racist idea is an idea that suggests one racial group is inferior or superior to another racial group in any way. The idea, sticking with this, is if schools that have 75% or more Black students are not rated A or B, there's an idea that Black students are not as intelligent. Some would say lazy. So racism is a marriage of the racist policies and racist ideas that produces and normalizes racial inequities. So these suspension and disciplinary policies and the thought of students of color being less intelligent, it normalizes. It's okay that school districts with Black students are lower rated than school districts with white students. You see how that works? So we use dehumanization as the lens in which to fight racism, because as a result of racism, it's the persistent invalidation of humanity. And it's a process by which individuals or groups' full humanity is denied, either through perception or actual treatment. Racialized trauma is the cumulative effects of racism. It's on an individual's mental and physical health. So we'll talk about dehumanization, how it leads to racialized trauma, which ultimately means there's a failure to thrive for children. So before I start this dehumanization cycle, this is where you come in. We believe that everyone has some level of power, whether it's where you work, go to school, if you're sitting next to your sister, mother, brother, father, who might have racist ideas, you have power to change things. So as we go through this dehumanization cycle, we're going to talk about the way that the Juanita Sims Doty Foundation is fighting racism. And we want you to consider where your power lies that you can help to change it. The first part is the negative narratives. And this says BYMOC, and that's boys and young men of color. That is, we focus on the youth, but right now, as it stands, the trajectory of boys and young men of color is worse off. And so we talk about these negative narratives about boys and young men of color that we read, we listen to. We even had one of the young ambassadors to tell us that he sees on TV that the students in his district are dumb, so he's dumb. And when Juanita and I listened to this, we realized we have to have conversations. These negative narratives, ultimately, they show boys and young men of color as dangerous and a possible threat, which ultimately serves as a license for dangerous actions towards boys and young men of color. These dangerous actions, I'll just say the obvious, is the killings of boys and young men of color by police. I want to go back and I want to say this because it's always important that you understand where we stand. When we talk about police and police reform, we don't believe that police should be defunded. We do believe that some of the principles behind defunding make sense. That's reimagining what policing looks like. So when a dangerous action toward a young man who had a fake $20 bill, the goal is if policing was somewhat reformed, there may have been a social worker or an emotional supporter there to support George Floyd, to say, what is it that you need and why are you using a counterfeit $20 bill versus him being killed? Okay. And so these dangerous actions that boys and young men of color, youth of color, people of color, they see, it becomes internalized. And when you start to internalize that you're not worthy of your full humanity, then often it causes the harmful internal feelings. And these harmful internal feelings can manifest themselves in low self-esteem and not believing that you're worth what your counterparts are worth. It makes you think that I don't have hope. So hopelessness becomes a part of it. And then as a result of that, destructive external reactions happen. That could be harming themselves or others. And when this happens, it's often treated as if it is because of the human being that they are and not as a result of the harmful internal feelings that they have because of this dehumanization cycle. And when they start to harm themselves or others, then the negative narratives start. This is the cycle that we're trying to break. With the Juanita Sims Doty Foundation, we're changing negative narratives. I don't know if you can see this, by having the ambassadors to write their own stories. And we give this to anybody who will read it because we want to change the narrative. Dangerous actions towards boys and young men of color. We realized after 9 years of mentoring youth of color and preparing them for a world that can be challenging for them, we realized that we needed to prepare the world for them. And that's when we stepped into advocacy and getting the awareness out there about dehumanization cycle. And now we're also in the process, we're partnering with the Kellogg Foundation to get data so that we can find out what negative experiences within systems in the state of Mississippi people of color, families of color have experienced. And these directors and directorate level people within the systems are partnering with us to give us feedback. And then we talk about what policies, practices, and procedures can we change as a result of this data so that dangerous actions are limited. The harmful internal feelings, we don't take a clinical approach, but we do from our mentors, we focus on the social and emotional health of the children. So that if there are some harmful internal feelings that we need to address, we can send them to someone that we may need to. We've done it in the past before. And oftentimes it's just a conversation. I know you saw my beautiful mom. She is the leader of the extra care team. And we've seen change in just one conversation when the ambassadors or the GMs feel like they're being heard. The destructive external reactions we're not addressing directly, but our goal with the other 3 dimensions is to prevent the destructive external reactions from happening. So as we speak this truth, we only talk in facts to your power, where can your power change this dehumanization cycle and help to disrupt it? So our strategy, we kind of talked about it. We will shape new narratives about children of color, especially boys and young men of color. We want to create safe and supportive spaces. You heard in my bio, we talk about culturally responsiveness. So as we individuals learn about the community of people of color, you know that we learn best in community and not individually. So we mentor in community. Being culturally responsive goes beyond being multicultural. Multicultural means, yes, it's necessary, and we put pictures on the wall that look like us. And we have people in, for example, in leadership positions that look like us in color. Multiculturalism is important, but culturally responsive means we are integrating it into the lessons that we're teaching. It's invaluable. We talked about partnering with systems to work with children and families of color to become aware and trauma or healing responsive. And we also are starting in June, actually. We're going to be starting our Humanity on Display conversations. And it's going to be the next level from this conversation, where we are interacting with community members, diverse groups, who are our ultimate goal is to find out how we can revitalize and revive humanity for all people. We'll just talk about the dimensions really quickly. Dehumanization happens historically, cultural and spiritual, social, emotional, and physical. So historical dehumanization is the thoughts, feelings, and actions that have led to mass destruction, punishment, or control of land and people. And you automatically know historically, what does that mean? Slavery. Slavery, the genocide of Native Americans. It's ultimately a way that the negatives are saying your people are dangerous and they need to be tamed. That's the negative narrative of the historical dehumanization. The action, that taming can only happen through extreme punishment or destruction. And then the harmful internal feelings. My history is shameful. I'm not proud of my own people. Those internal feelings can ultimately lead to destructive behaviors. Then we have the cultural and spiritual dehumanization. And this is demonizing, disregarding, devaluing, or marginalizing the cultural and spiritual practices of communities of color. So I just put a few examples here. We don't have to agree with it, but these are facts. I use cultural music, for example. In DC, about 4 years ago, there's a store, the T-Mobile store, that played go-go music for the last 30 years. It was a cultural experience for the neighborhood. People went by expecting to hear it.
Let's go.
And gentrification happened, and white people started to move in. And then there started to be complaints about the noise from the T-Mobile store. They focused on someone in power who ultimately had them sanctioned to get the music to stop. Well, the T-Mobile store owner was not having it after 30 years. So he took it to court, and ultimately the court said, we are clarifying that the go-go music is the music of the District of Columbia, and you can play your music. But that is a way to say your cultural practices aren't important to us. They're noise. 11 a.m. on Sunday, now you know, just for you guys, I put this on here, is, and I spelled it wrong. Oh my God. Okay, the spiritual, oh gosh, spiritual racists call segregation. 11 10 a.m. on Sunday is the most racist hour, segregated hour in America. Why? Because churches are segregated. Then there's liberation theology. This is theology that many pastors back in the slavery days, Martin Luther King, decided that they wanted to take an approach that addressed the whole human person, a unity of both spirit and body. And it interprets the gospel from the vantage point of the oppressed. And the purpose is precisely to liberate people from all forms of oppression. This is a theology that often, because it's more of in spatial terms, that is not accepted, but many Black pastors take this theology. And so often the cultural and spiritual dehumanization happens because it's not accepted. And then I also like to talk about the country church that I grew up in Canton, Mississippi, when the hats were bigger than the pews. That's a cultural example of Black families and Black women. It's changing a little bit now, but it's been deemed unnecessary. The negative narratives, your cultural and spiritual practices are primitive and inferior. The actions toward people of color, we're superior to you. We can erase or diminish the value of your culture and your spiritual practices. The harmful internal feelings, my culture is invisible, irrelevant, and bad, and I'm ashamed of my cultural identity. Then you have the social dehumanization, where resources are diverted or fail to invest in communities of color. It restricts the rights of these communities in the social, educational, or legal arenas. Now, this is a picture that I've always used, but if you know, over the last couple of months, in that second picture, I could have included Jackson, right? The water crisis. So the resources of transportation, the most poverty-stricken neighborhoods which happen to be Black often don't have public transit systems, which means often they have a problem getting to their jobs, which means they ultimately often don't have jobs or aren't working and continue to stay in poverty. The water crisis in Flint and Detroit, Michigan, let's be honest, if it was in Boca Raton, Florida, would have been handled immediately. So you have cities like Jackson, Flint, and Detroit who are suffering these water crises, but they're the highest in these areas in Black people. They're the highest in poverty. They're the highest in property tax. They're the lowest in property value. Those are racist inequities that have to be solved. And if you look at the page to the end, of course, the prison systems, we can talk about that forever. But I believe if you solve poverty, you solve dehumanization, you disrupt it, you will disrupt crime. So the negative narratives, if the community is broken because you are inferior, and it will never thrive. And just as an example, with the Jackson water crisis, you get dehumanizing comments about if Jackson would just pay their bills. That's dehumanizing to people of color. Dangerous actions towards boys and young men of color. It is acceptable to withhold and underfund development in your community. The harmful and internal feelings. My community lacks values and strengths. We're helpless and beyond hope. The emotional. limit expressions of empathy toward communities of color. And I think Pastor Bruce was talking about this before. And demonize the communities for their outcry in the face of negative experiences. So their experiences that people of color, they want to have just like anyone else, but their full humanity is denied because people claim that they're afraid. The picture to the right is a couple of Native American young men who wore their cultural attire to a university campus tour. And because a woman, a white woman, felt threatened by them, she enforced her power and had them removed from the tour because she said it threatened, the way that they looked threatened her. That is emotional dehumanization. And I'll just give a personal example. I have a friend from college who, she's a nurse anesthetist, and she and her family, they live in a wealthy neighborhood. They went to the pool in the community neighborhood, and her 8-year-old daughter was putting her foot in the water, and a white woman was in the pool, and she started splashing it, saying, "We don't want Black people in this pool. Get out of this pool," to an 8-year-old girl. Her mother, because she had, she knew of my background, called me to say, what should I say to her? If she had not, everybody doesn't have friends who focus on this. And so the emotional dehumanization and the impacts of it can be long lasting if not addressed. Our goal is to disrupt it. The negative narratives with emotional dehumanization, you generate and are responsible for your own pain and loss. The dangerous actions, it's acceptable to suspend empathy and withhold your civil rights, like swim in a pool or barbecue or wear your cultural attire. The harmful internal feelings, we are inferior people suffering emotional abuse, pain, and loss, and it's a normal part of my culture. Imagine the hopelessness, the helplessness that people, boys of young men of color, would feel. What are the destructive actions that can happen as a result of that? And then finally, the physical dehumanization. Place the physical bodies of members of community of color at risk of harm. Philando Castile, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, George Floyd, Dante Wright, Tamir Rice, Stephen Clark, Ahmaud Arbery. These are young men of color who were killed by the police. It was a physical manifestation of dehumanization for all Black people to watch. A man we talked about who was given a $20 fake bill. Imagine if our worst mistake was made right before our death. We would not be the people that we are. We have to be given an opportunity. The negative narratives, your lives and bodies are threats. You are expendable. We can inflict psychological and physical violence without consequence. It is both deserved and necessary for our safety. The harmful internal feelings, my brothers and sisters' bodies are threats, and they can be sacrificed, even if it's a mistake. I think this is a good opportunity for me. I have a few more slides, but I was asked to read my poem, and I want to go ahead and do that now. It is a poem entitled Juxtaposition. And I'm just going to read this because Philando Castile was the first person that you saw on the screen who was killed by a police officer. He was in his car and he had his child in the back. And he had his child in the back and he had his girlfriend in the car next to him. He was reaching for his driver's license and he was shot and killed. I was watching this when my son was 6 years old and he was sleeping. And I was so traumatized by the experience that I needed an outlet. And so I wrote this poem. And I was asked to read it, so I want to read it to you. Be still, my heart. I'm proud, I'm scared. I listened to his breath while he lay, only half a dozen years of life to the day. And all I do is cry and pray. Be still, my heart. No, please beat again. My son, he needs me. But how can I give you hope in a world filled with hopelessness? How can I protect you in that beautiful skin that causes so much uneasiness? How can I teach you to be independent when I need you to depend on me? How can I teach you to be honest, although it doesn't mean you'll go untouched? Be still, my heart. No, please beat again. My eyes swell with tears and my soul is injured. How can I teach you about the great strides that Martin and Medgar have made when the evidence of hate has only transformed its state? Be still, my heart. No, please beat again. How do I defend your right to live a life free from fear while fearing for your life? How do I teach you to be strong when your strength can get you killed? How do I help you find your voice when your voice could offend the shield? Don't wear the hoodie. Don't speak so loud. Don't ask too many questions. Don't act too wild. Don't get an attitude. Don't appear to be rude. Don't wear your hair like that. Don't just stand around and chat. Don't run anywhere. Don't stand still and stare. God, hold my heart. It's still, it breaks, it aches, it's numb, but the love of my son is way too great. Our next steps are not clear, but I'll lead with my heart. It beats. It's called juxtaposition because the trauma that I felt, I'm so blessed to be raising a young Black son, but I'm also fearful. So those feelings of excitement and love are juxtaposed to the feelings of fear and danger. Those are the feelings that we have. And so we want to recognize how dehumanization and health are correlated. Teens of color, they're reporting the high levels of discrimination, higher blood pressure, high body mass, higher levels of stress-related hormones, poor sleep, poor symptoms of depression, more symptoms of depression, and lower self-esteem. All of these comorbidities that are equated to race, when in fact, it's a level of trauma that causes most of them. And then you see the experience of trauma is significant in these risk factors. I won't read it because I want to make sure we have enough time. The impact of these ongoing traumas has effects on a person's brain and body, increasing their vulnerability to post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health disorders. So if my history is shameful, I'm not proud of my own people, causing physical disease. This just shows the connecting internal feelings to external behavior. And we talked about hope and hopelessness. Sustainable services and solutions cannot be provided when trying to end racism without ending dehumanization and addressing racialized trauma. What can you do? Use storytelling as healing. It's impactful on the youth, adults who you work with, impact on practice and policy, and community and society. Culturally responsive programs provide connection, protection, affection, and redirection for children. And these just are some of the ways that we're using data-driven and community-informed approaches to our work. We acknowledge that there's a need for change. We're working on the research for system-driven approaches, mobilizing cross-sector groups. We talked about the humanity on display and providing authentic opportunities for our children to thrive. This is just some information. The American Academy of Pediatrics has labeled racism a core social determinant of health, and it drives the disparities. Thank you all for listening. So I'm willing to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCullough. Yeah, please. And that poem, people are asking if we can get our hands on that incredible poem that you wrote and recited. So I just want to let everybody know that I'll, if Dr. McCullough, she blesses it, gives me permission, I'll share it far and wide and make sure you have your hands on it. The whole thing was so powerful, Dr. McCullough. We've got a lot of people on this call, so I wonder if possibly, if you have a question, could you share it on the chat? And maybe we do have room if someone has a good question right on the tip, and they want to go ahead and share it, you can unmute yourself and ask. But others, if you would, as you're thinking about questions or comments, you can also use the chat room. Does anybody have a question that they want to share verbally right now?
Yes, Fitzgerald. My question is, what happens as a group when peoples of color are not heard or their voice is silent? What is the effect of that?
So that is the internal harmful feelings that we talked about before, that ultimately ends up in the unfortunate riots. Voice of the people that are unheard is experienced through riots. And so it is our goal to really get the voices heard of people of color. And we're doing that through community conversations. We're doing that through presentations like now, because we recognize that people of color's voices, they feel like they have not been heard. So we have partnered with social workers before to find out what can be done. Like I said, we talked about the racial socialization part of our curriculum, so that we focus on children specifically, so that their internal feelings are not growing numb or angry. And so the effects can be dangerous, but we're doing our best to combat that.
Any other questions before we turn it over to Reverend Henry? Anybody else have a question?
Yeah.
They'd like to ask? Go ahead.
I just wonder, well, first of all, let me say thank you for this amazing presentation. I think the thing that I'm wondering, and the thing that I deal with as a local church pastor, are that conversations that you're having with children, particularly with Black youth, that are sort of these cross-cultural kinds of conversation, and where they're putting white kids in the same room or some other races of kids, and what are those conversations like? What are the pieces that, as pastors, that we should be sort of entailing in our conversations too, so that we can have foster sort of a this racial healing. even at that age. So I guess my question more so is just, are there models that you have used, or is there some sort of curriculum of having these cross-cultural conversations?
So to answer your question, yes. We have partnered with, through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, many organizations that are using racial healing through conversations in a diverse group for children. And we can make sure to get some of that to Bruce. We have a few organizations that we partner with. I utilize them personally because my son goes to majority white school. And people are surprised by that. But it's because, number one, I sit in a level of privilege that I don't take for granted at all. But I want my son not to experience what I experienced when I went to an old school with white people when I was 19. It was a culture shock and I felt less than. And personally, I needed him to know that he was just as good, and that he knew that he could make changes. So I have to have conversations with him on a regular basis, with his friends. And so I do use some of the practices that I've learned from these organizations. I'll be happy to get them to you guys.
Carla, I think it's important to talk about the systems, surveys that you're using, and I work with the Kellogg Foundation, because maybe some of the people on the Zoom can help getting these surveys out to people across the state.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are right now in the process of a pilot. We're sending to some families, and what we're asking are questions about their experiences with systems, because our ultimate goal is to help define rules of engagement for children of color. And so this survey, we're going to get the feedback from them, and then we're going to utilize that feedback to delve down just a little bit deeper, and we're going to have focus groups, and we're going to find out, when you are a part of this education, human services, health, when you go into these places, how do you feel? Is there anything that we need to concentrate on? And then we're going to utilize that data and take it to the director level people within the systems and say, this is what people are saying, because we want them to have a voice in this conversation. So tell us if this is a practice or a policy that's dehumanizing to people of color. Is there a reason, or is there something that we can change? And then we'll bring in experts that are going to help to create solutions. And the ultimate goal is to have systems and community that are not dehumanizing, but that are empowering for all children, but specifically children of color, so that they can heal if there are any wounds, racist wounds, and they can grow, and then they can thrive. And so at the end of this, I think that I've been graciously allowed to give you in the chat box a link for a survey. And at the end of that survey, we're asking for your email address if you want to keep abreast of what we're doing, even if you want to be involved. At the end of that presentation, I have our office number and my cell number, so you can definitely reach out. And I know that Pastor Henry and Pastor Case, and I have to say Mr. Cousin Owen LaRue, know how to get in touch with us if there's anything that we can do to support you.
So you're going to put that in the chat now, Carla?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat.
Okay, and while she's doing that, we certainly want your partnership, if that's the correct term, Pastor Bruce and Pastor Henry, to help get the surveys out, to help with the community conversations. And I know when I heard Pastor Henry doing one of his sermons, he talked about the end racism, and that's what I said, oh, this is something we need to partner on. So we thank Pastor Henry, Pastor Bruce, and Cousin LaRue for getting us all together so we can work on this together. And that's how we're going to end racism, by working together. And we're certainly open to sharing what resources we have with the United Methodist Church. and this task force. So thank you for this great opportunity. I'm very proud of Dr. McCullough. She happens to be my niece. Her mother happens to be my sister. So we are going to support her however we can, because we want to end racism in Mississippi and the United States.
Thank you, Dr. Doty. And if you all just allow me another second, I did put the link in the chat box. And this, if creating a partnership is powerful, it will add to the partnership that we've created with the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, who have vowed that they want to learn more and be a part of this process as we create an anti-racist center. So all of these partnerships and relationships that we build in the goal of making a greater Mississippi, we look forward to working with all of you, any and all of you.
Thank you, Dr. McCullough. Thank you, Dr. Doty, as well. You know, the one thing I'm looking at as well is I'm seeing one thing in the chat box, a question, which is, what is the plan of action in which white communities can participate so that the message of this work crosses the obvious boundaries of race? How would you respond?
Yes,
Dr. McCullough, what can, yeah, please tell us, help it. What tangible things might we do? Yes.
So the tangible things, of course, if you put in your survey, your email address, as we start to have these humanities on display conversations, we have developed a lot of partnerships across the state, across the country, and we want everyone to be represented in these conversations. So we'll have a few roundtable discussions. We haven't developed that executive committee yet, but maybe some of you would want to be on there. And then also, we're not going to lead all of these conversations. We want others to lead these conversations that don't look like us, but to show that there is humanity on display and that we can work together to change and be anti-racist. And there's a big difference in someone saying, I'm not racist. That's what Ibram Kendi says. Yes. There's a difference in someone saying, I'm not racist and being anti-racist. Racism, there's no neutrality. Either you are racist or have racist ideas, or you're anti-racist. And so our goal is to be anti-racist.
Amen. So Dr. McCullough, so a great plug-in entry point for local churches is to maybe pay attention and get involved with humanities on display, that would be a good first step for whether you're a white church, black church, integrated, whatever, that you can jump in right there and make a difference. Is that what you're saying, Dr. McCullough?
Yes, we'll start having meetings toward the end of May, June. And if I receive your email address, you will be invited. And we will find out who wants to be on committees, what it is that you want to do. We'll have a full description of what humanities on display is going to be. And of course, we are happy to share resources and find out if there's someone that you want to invite to these meetings. We were able to get a support from Senator Wicker, and of course, all of our senators to do this work. And so we're excited to get ready to start.
Thank you. Thank y'all so much. Reverend Henry, I'm going to pass the baton to you, and you can kind of close it out however you'd like to.
All right, I was looking at I think the last question that was entered in the chat.
Yes. Can I address that?
Yes, ma'am.
The question, are not the problems that the Black communities face universal human challenges? And as long as we separate them into race, ensures racism? The answer is, if there's a problem with that Black communities face, it is a human problem, absolutely. The challenge is, we want to make sure that when we say racism or we say racist, that we aren't using it as a term to degrade, but as a descriptor of ideas and ideologies that are where people are on unequal footing. So we first want to take, when we use the word racist or racism, some people are offended, and that takes away the power to describe what's happening. And if it takes away the power, then we can't change it. So we first have to understand what racist and racism is, and know that it is a problem that impacts not just Black people, but communities of color. And because it does, that means it impacts the country, it impacts the world. But we first have to give power back to describing what's happening to communities of color. And I'm a big component, I want to add to it, that Black people can be racist. Now, there's a lot of research. Now, this is Carlaism, okay? So there's a lot of research out there that says Black people cannot be racist. I don't believe that. Because if racism is an ideology or an idea that makes one race feel inferior or superior, there are things dehumanizing that we can say about white people that makes our ideas racist. So we can be. That's why it's a universal problem. But factually, the majority of racist ideas and ideologies negatively impact people of color.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. McCullough and Dr. Doty, for joining us. And I have, as others have expressed, enjoyed your presentation and what you stand for and what you all are doing and the work and the way you involve others. So the people we have with us is a prime example of what it looks like with us not working alone. This lets us know that there are other persons out here, other organizations out here that are planning and wanting to do the same thing that we have a passion for doing right now and right here in Mississippi. And as they explain to us, that it's not just happening here in Mississippi, it's happening all over the country, worldwide. There are people all over the place wanting to end racism in whatever way that they do that. And for us to be doing it here in Mississippi is a great thing for me and my children, and for you and yours, or anybody else that involves you. I've always said that we, in order for this to be as impactful as it should be, and as life-changing as it should be, then we should not only speak to our communities, our church communities. There are 5 people on here that either heard me speak about what we're doing in a message of mine, or directly I said, this is what we're doing, so log on to this Zoom, and once we're done, if you have questions, let's talk about it so we can further the conversation. Not only that, I've always said that when we're talking to one another, let's get outside of our comfortable church groups and actually impact the community. I'm right here at Hines Community College this morning. And the reason I'm here, one, I had a meeting here, and the other reason I was here is whenever we're having these discussions or our little healing circles that we have, I come here and I involve myself with the students who are here, Black and white, old and young, and when I'm at home, I involve myself with Black and white students from Belhaven and from Millsap. We're having this conversation about what race looks like and what racism looks like and how can we end it all together. And that's the reason I was going to have, and they hadn't come in yet, so I'm not going to just, they probably had a class that started right now. But what I wanted them to do was to be a part of this conversation, so then they could respond to what they hear is going on. So they'll know not only do they see people working on their behalf, and I'm talking about Black and white students that would have 2. I intentionally wanted one of each to be in here so they could hear the conversation and then understand that there are people working to make school better, to make church better, to make walking down the street better, or going to the store better, or just making living better. And to hear them respond to you all about what's happening, because they respond to me all the time. And what I try to do is make a space available to them for them to express themselves how they want to. Because one thing I heard and had written down is the way we communicate, right? And the way a Black child communicates, and I'm speaking for myself, the way I communicate opposed to my white friend is going to sound totally different. We may be talking about the same thing, but the way I communicate may sound totally different. But then again, the Black individual is discriminated against more for having the same kind of conversation, but it sounds different. It comes off, it's received different. So we've talked about what communication sounds like what dressing up sounds like, and what it looks like in certain areas and things like that. So I open the floor for them to be able to just speak freely. And they might have been a little skittish to speak freely in a group like this, but when we're by ourselves, I was like, look, whatever you're saying, whatever you're doing, I hear you how you talk up and down the hall. So like freely talk here. So just making individuals outside of our church understand and know that we are here for them as the church community that we are trying to build. We're not trying to build a church around them. We're trying to build a better world around them. And so that's our goal as we continue to partner with organizations like this one, and they partner with us, and we move farther outside of our comfort zone to persons who really look at us strange when we're having this conversation. And all of us have had several conversations in our healing circles that are going on and things like that. So in your healing circles and in your moments of study and in your meetings and things like that, introduce the problem. And it seems, and this will never go away, because it seems as if every time we get ready to have a meeting like this, something happens on our national scene that causes us to be like, are we spinning our wheels, or are we actually acting in a way that's going to make change come? And it might not have happened here in Mississippi yet, or we might not have heard about it yet, but we need to know that what we do here affects everywhere else. Now let's make a change here in Mississippi so that when we are going other places, right, that we could they'll know you're coming, they know you've been there. And I had when I was in Georgia in the bank, and I forget his name, but he was one of the civil rights icons there. And while I was in the bank with my daughter, we were walking around. She was small at the time. I think she was about 2. And every time I got up to go do something, she was right behind me. She still does that. It kind of makes me itch a little bit. But and I would tell her to sit down until I got done. And he told me, he said, after talking with him about who I was and who he was, and knowing that he had done so much, he said, don't tell her to sit down. Not in that kind of way. Don't tell her. He said, because she's trying to follow you. He said, but she may not be able to step in the footsteps that you are making, because my steps are a lot wider than her steps at the time. He said, but walk in a way that she know you have been there. So that's what I'm encouraging all of us to do. That Vicki Baldwin is a lot taller than I am. She when she makes a step, I may have to reach way out to step in her footsteps, right? But at least I know when I get ready to make that step, at least I know she has been there before, right? When Rusty and I go hunting, his boot footprints are way bigger than mine. And when I step in that boot print, not only do I know it's bigger than mine, but I know Rusty has been there. And that's what I'm encouraging all of us to do as we embark on this lifelong task, is to make footsteps in your church, make footsteps in your community, make footsteps in your office, wherever you are, in the conference office, in the district office, in your church office, in your school office, wherever, that people know you have been there. This man I sit with when I come over here, he's 79 years old, and he pastors here in Learned, right here on the other side of Raymond. And when he and I are having conversations like this, he looks at me like, you sure? you want to have these, and we literally have conversations where both of us be looking at each other like, wow, like we can't believe we both are talking like this. He's an older white gentleman, and his lifelong work in his pastoral ministry has been to make change and effect change like this. So now to hear that we are trying to do this in Mississippi, and not just a Methodist thing, but me talking with him lets him know it's a universal thing. And I don't want to talk much longer because I wish I had the students here so I could have actually had that to happen, for them to respond, so they could know that the work is happening on their behalf, and we could hear. We've been told before that there's a golden rule and a silver rule. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The silver rule is do unto others as they would like done unto them. So my purpose for having them here was for them to tell us what they would like have done for them. So we wouldn't just be building churches and building buildings and nobody's showing up. So that was my purpose for that. My ending piece is to say thank you to all of you that have come out and that's continuing to process and do the work of life changing, changing the lives of individuals. And the first life that has to be changed is our own. Once our heart and mind has been changed, then we can do that for other persons. Again, I thank you. There are several persons on here that I need to talk to, but I will reach out to you personally. Got another little meeting that's starting here in a minute. The reason I'm actually over here. So, but I'll reach out to you, and we'll have a conversation from here. Bruce, that's it. That's what I had, man. I apologize for the students not showing up, but they have work to do. So.
Hey, that's okay, Domini. Thank you so much. And remember, if you haven't experienced a racial healing group, racial healing circle, that is a great first step. Just contact your district superintendent and tell them that you want to be a part of it. It's a transformative experience, but we know we don't want to stop there. And this is part of that. We will continue to have conversations about every other month together. You'll get another invitation. If you're not sure you're not on the End Racism for Good email chain or email group, just email me. I am at jbrucecase@gmail.com. I put it in the chat box. Also, remember the survey in the chat room. Please support Dr. McCullough and Dr. Doty by filling that out. That gives them good feedback. Again, y'all, thank you so much for sharing with us. I learned some new definitions. I got a little, I learned some things today, and I want to continue to connect with this foundation in tangible ways, to volunteer, to do what I can, because it's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about seeing where God is already at work in our state and jumping in and giving our resources, our money, our time, whatever we can do. That's how we can get stronger and become more anti-racist. I love that term. I'm tired of being neutral, and I know you are too, because you're here. And so I'm trying to get better at that. And again, thank you all so much. Domini, thank you so much for your words. And again, take the Survey Monkey and email me if you want to get on the email list. We love you all. Let's continue to work together for Mississippi, for it to be a place where every child can grow strong, get a great education, and advance to their full potential in life. God bless you, Dr. McCullough, Dr. Doty. Y'all are doing awesome, holy work. This is discipleship work. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you so much.
And everybody, take care and have a great day. Let's keep in touch. Love you.